Yeah, so how are we gonna separate you, because we are doing an audio thing, but maybe your thing is the style guide and your thing is the academic layout. So maybe that's a good split. So about the academic layout, I love the fact that it was CSS in JavaScript that's done differently than usual CSS. What about?
While I was listening to your talks, I didn't notice anything. So to me, you were excellent.
Hey there, React Finland. I'm Holly Gibson, a developer at Smartly.io. Perhaps you've heard of us. We automate every step in social advertising to unlock greater performance and creativity. We work with some of the most advanced digital customers, such as Uber and Zalando. We were founded in 2013 by 2 Alto students and now have over 400 employees in 17 offices across 5 continents. Our whole engineering team is located in Helsinki. We have multiple full-stack teams that support different business functions. We are fully autonomous, and most of us develop our own microservices and work closely with DevOps, which provides lots of opportunity for learning. We are huge fans of using React with TypeScript and have over 1 million lines of React across our repos. We Smartlies are proud to sponsor React Finland. We hope you enjoy the sessions from your sofa. Stay safe.
Hi everybody, I'm Juhis from Futurist, and I would like to warmly welcome you all to this year's React Finland. We're super happy to partner up with React Finland again to bring this great community together to learn and improve ourselves as software developers. At Futurist, we build digital services and products together with our clients. We combine software development, design, and data science to build great products and user experiences.
Every morning when I wake up, I think about the colleagues I get to work with every day. I'm really proud of the team that I'm in right now. Every day in Digia, I get to come in and face new challenging programming issues that we have. So I really like that about the workplace. In the current project, I get to work with very hot topics which is on the market right now. There's, for example, microservices they talk about a lot, and also cloud computing, etc. If you're still searching for your path in the technology space or want to try new technologies or push your career, I think Digia is definitely the place to apply for.
Walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for regrets. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe trying to protect your soul. We are heroes tonight. We will fly above the sky. We are heroes tonight.
Hello everyone, this is Thomas and I'm here with Tuuli. We are developers at Columbia Road and we wanted to give you a little presentation about our approach on documentation. Solutions that we provide are often central and crucial to the business of our clients. For some, even 100% of their business might come through the services created together with us. Documentation obviously helps with anything from further development and communication to handovers and onboarding. And as an overall goal, we aim to keep the projects always in a state where they could be handed over to the client within a short time frame.
In the beginning of the project or even in the planning phase, make sure you have enough time for the documentation and make sure that the time is included in the estimation as well. Because documenting takes time. And you can't, and you even shouldn't document everything. So you can start by listing all the necessary things that you need to document and start prioritizing them with the time that you have. Also, don't forget who are you making the documentation for and what are the problems that they are trying to solve. What is the overall view of the project? Why were the big choices made? So why did we use a certain platform or tech stack? And who are the important stakeholders in the project?
Exactly, and then drilling a bit deeper detail. So also what is the general technical architecture of the solution? API definitions of the related services. Generally certainly processes that are recurring often, but for some reason cannot be automated just yet. And overall, things that are not under constant change.
The easiest way to ensure that the documentation is actually written and stays up to date is to tie it up with some other processes. For example, if you're using Scrum, you can make it part of your definition of done, or you can have it as a checklist item on your pull request. Also, if you like, you can make it a part of your routine and reserve some time for documentation writing, for example, every month or even more often.
Typically, projects need at least some kind of generic overview documents, and at Columbia Road have created a set of documentation templates to support thinking about what kind of documentation is needed, and to provide a starting point for creating the documentation that is given for each client case. First of all, the project overview is a high-level description of the problem and systems are being worked on, and it's running context as well. Then, of course, the onboarding documents for helping team members to get up to speed on the project, and ways of working to describe the practicalities and possible SLAs, and also the responsibilities and how they are divided amongst members.
Definitely. So when the new developer is joining the team, the first thing they are asking is the architecture description. So the technical overview is definitely important. Also some service-specific documentation that gives more detailed description of the individual services. For example, storefront, the product API, or whatever microservices you have in your project. Also the end user manual. This content can vary a lot, but typically web shops, in web shop it describes shopkeeper functionality that is necessary for the day-to-day running of the shops.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Gave you too much, now I'm swallowed. Now I'm the fool while you're breaking rules. Dangerous path that I follow. Oh, go on, just do what you do. And it bleed for you, cry for you, oh, oh. Let me bleed.
Hello, and welcome to React Finland. We thought, what could we do to improve conferences? So we asked people, and overall, the number one complaint we always get is that conferences are too big. So we are solving this problem by pioneering a new format called MiniConf. And today is our first React Finland MiniConf, and the topic of today is documentation. I am your host, Jani Evakallio. That name pronunciation will be on the test. I know what you're all wondering. He is at home. Is he wearing pants? Yes, he is. But also, are they the same pants he's been wearing for 2 months and they're full of stains? Yes, that is also true. We'll be joined by three wonderful speakers: Carolyn Stransky talking about humanizing your documentation, Kenigbolo Meya Stephen talking about documentation and legacy React code, and Margarita Obraztsova talking about going beyond Redux and diversifying front-end state management. What I'm going to do is I'm going to really quickly run through what we're going to be doing today, but if you are not really following, that's okay. Most of this information will be repeated in a minute. So this conference is running in a dual format. We have a free stream and we have a premium stream. And really the only difference is that with free stream, you will get all the same content as you do with the premium stream, but you get it later. And with the premium stream, you will be able to participate live to all parts of the event. So we will have 3 talks, we will have Q&As, and we will have a panel after all the talks. If you have bought a ticket to the React Finland mini conference, or if you are a ticket holder for the React Finland 2020 event that we were planning on having in sunny Helsinki this summer, you can now participate in all of this. But if you are watching us from live stream, between all the talks, you won't be able to see the Q&As. You will, however, be able to watch ads and promotions from our generous sponsors. Whether or not you are a paying ticket holder, you can still join the fun on Slack. So you can find the Slack link on react-finland.fi. And you can send questions to our speakers. So if you are participating live in the conference, you should definitely ask questions, because otherwise I will have to ask all the questions and I might run out of them, which would be a loss to the world, really. But even if you aren't participating live, feel free to ask any questions, and then you can watch the Q&A after, or at least be memorized for future generations at the beautifully post-produced conference video. Now remember that, this Slack is still a human interaction, just in the same way as a regular conference is. And just like a regular in-person conference, we are committed to providing a friendly, safe, and welcoming environment for everyone, regardless of their gender, their sexual orientation, their ability, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic status, their religion, or lack thereof, or really any other thing, that you can think of that isn't something that is under that person's control or is part of their identity. And the code of conduct that we follow here is the Berlin Code of Conduct. And no, that is not the same as the code of conduct that you should be performing at a nightclub queue in Berlin. That's an entirely different code of conduct, and I've never really managed to master it. But the code of conduct in our event is really, really simple. Just try to be a decent human being and follow the rules in the Berlin Code of Conduct. And if something goes wrong, feel free and please do reach out to one of our organizers. So that would be Juho Vepsäläinen, Bibro, Mikael Novikov, Freixenet, or Harri Määttä on the conference Slack. But now, without further ado, let's go to fireside chat and bring out our wonderful speakers. Hello. Hi, everyone. Let me do a little window management here, because you are tiny, and I've met at least one of you 3 in person. I know you are not that small, kinda. You are like this tiny now. Okay, here we go. Hi, Kenigbolo, you look incredibly chill. What's going on?
It's a post-birthday celebration. So I had my birthday yesterday, and I have a continuation today. It's not so sunny in Finland every day, so when you get the sun, you need to come out and absorb as much as you can. And that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah, that is the attitude. How was your birthday?
It was mostly work, but I did manage to get a couple of beers later on, so I'm good.
Nice. Are you having a beer right now?
Oh yeah, actually a dark beer.
Nice. I decided not to drink throughout the whole lockdown, because like after the first week, I realized that I was like in a permanent state of like hangover. So I figured this is not a good thing. So I'm off it. I'm on just pure juice.
Yeah, but you can say that's juice, and it could still be rum with mint. So I can't tell for sure.
But that is the magic of internet and live streaming. You can nothing is true. It's really everything that you present. Hey, Carolyn, how are you doing?
good. How are you?
I am great. When did I last see you? Was it at like React?
No, I was just thinking. It feels like forever ago. Back when we could like, you know, be within arm's length of people.
I know.
Remember.
Like I'm not saying this specifically like regarding you, but in general, I just miss giving people hugs.
I don't. That's one thing. I'm like so ready for this lockdown to be done and then people to never touch me again. Like I don't want a handshake, I don't want a hug, I don't want a high five. Like everyone can just stay away. That's what I'm excited for with this changing world.
Was this like your birthday wish or something? Are we to blame you for all of this?
No. My birthday was right before the lockdown though, so I don't know. I would never wish this though. That would be ridiculous. But I do like the idea of like getting rid of the handshake. I think that is golden.
Yeah,
amazing.
Yeah, but that's what I'm like. We agree. We should get rid of the handshakes. It's just like I prefer hugs and you prefer to stand awkwardly a few meters away and wave at people.
Yeah. Or like, have you seen the people who are like introducing themselves like by their feet? I can't act it out with my hands, but like, you know, they're like tapping their feet together.
You want to try to do a really awkward foot five right now?
Yeah.
All right. I don't know why I put myself in this. Hello. All right. Let's go to our next fireside panelist. Hey, Margarita, how you doing?
Hi. I'm all right.
Good. I feel like, you know, I kind of overdid it on the last one, so I'm trying to be sort of, you know, kind of chill here. Anything interesting going on in your life recently?
To be honest, I'm surprisingly okay with the lockdown. I'm more of a hugger, just like you, but you know, staying here at home didn't hurt either. So I guess I'm all right with both.
Welcome. Where are you based, actually?
I'm in Helsinki.
Nice. I wish I was in Helsinki. There was I had a flight booked the week before lockdown to Helsinki and back, but I didn't take it because I wasn't sure if you know, Boris Johnson was going to close the UK borders because I'm in London. So yeah, I almost got stuck in Finland for a few months. So I'm glad I didn't do it.
Well, it's not all that bad. The weather has been really great for the last month, I think, which is surprising. We're gonna pay for this later this summer, but still.
Yeah, I mean that is for those of the audience members who aren't from Finland. Finnish summer works essentially on this kind of like weird psychological punishment policy, where like if it is sunny early on in the spring, it sets up your expectations, and then it just pulls the rug out of your feet, and it's gonna rain throughout entire July.
Exactly.
Yes. All right. Well, I think that was a pretty good intro. Who has anything interesting happening? Are you working on anything cool that you wanna, you know, plug to people? No? God damn it. We should have gotten more interesting speakers. Somebody who's actually working on something.
Well,
I mean, define cool. Go, Sue.
No worries. Go ahead. I'll go after you.
No, I was just asking to like define cool. What is cool?
Oh, what me to define? Cool. Well, I can define cool as the, you know, obviously the cool one of the group, the one that gets the big portrait mode. Yeah, I mean, like honestly, like if you look at me on the screen and look at you on the screen, I think it's pretty clear who's the you know, who's the star of the show. So anyway, I think what's cool, documentation is cool.
Yeah, but all the cool things in my life right now are nothing related to code or documentation. So.
Oh, so you do have cool things going on, like birthday parties, sunshine, sunglasses.
Yeah, I think I'm becoming more of a Finn than a Brit, which is, in a very good way, a good thing. I'm learning a lot of basic stuff that a few years ago I didn't think I'll do, but now I'm a bit of a handyman. So I'm fixing things, you know, I'm sawing wood. I did say to my mum, like, I'm actually chopping wood, and my mom is like, nah, that's not my boy. That's not happening. So yeah, there are a couple of new things for me, which is quite interesting.
Have you already bought like one of those red and black checkered shirts?
The lumberjacks, of course I have. I also have the overall that's actually light green and black as well. And another interesting fact, I'm actually going to, I've never done that before, but apparently I'm going to learn how to build a deck this summer, if the weather permits, somewhere in the archipelago.
You're gonna go to the archipelago and then you're gonna build a deck and then you're gonna leave, so you don't get to use the deck.
No, for 2 days, I might get to use it depending on how soon we finish, but yeah, we'll see.
I personally feel like that's a pretty high sort of effort to reward ratio. How about you build a deck like closer to your house, so like you don't have to take a boat to it?
Yeah, but I prefer to go away from the city, so the less of the people, the more fun it is, actually.
That's true. Actually, that's been my policy as well. It's worked out really well. If people get too close, I just say something horrible to them and alienate them. I think, you know, it's worked out pretty well. All right. Yeah. So, okay. So the theme of the event today is documentation, and like we have plenty of time. We have all 3 talks. We have 3 Q&A sessions, and we have a panel. So we don't need to talk a lot about documentation. But like one thing that I did do is I asked on Twitter yesterday, what are some of like people's favorite documentation sites? And what I thought was quite interesting was that like all the documentation sites that are really popular, you know, happen to correlate with the size of the project. And, you know, in some ways that kind of makes sense because, you know, more people, you know, everybody contributes to like documentation. But I was wondering, like, is there like a reverse like causation? Like, do projects become popular because of documentation? Like, do you personally choose what you use based on, you know, the quality of docs?
Definitely. I mean, especially I think in the case of writing software fast and producing MVPs, like in the consultancy, people often think, especially those who write documentation, like they often think that like the way you read documentation is you're sitting in front of the fireplace, you know, with a cup of cappuccino, reading the docs slowly and thoroughly. But the truth is you start reading it when everything is on fire. You need to incorporate a new library into your thing, and you just need to skim it through and understand what the thing is about. So that's pretty much, you know, how you choose the new project nowadays. You look for the low-hanging fruit, sort of something that's easily understood and is ready to be used right away, pretty much.
Yeah, that's the feeling I got as well. Like, it's almost like documentation is marketing now. Like when I go look at, you know, a software project, in the beginning, I looked things like GitHub stars or even NPM downloads. But then I realized there's very little correlation between the quality of the project and the, you know, the metrics, because it turns out that these things are very hackable. If you have a lot of Twitter followers, then you get a lot of GitHub stars. I feel like documentation is like the marketing engine. Would you agree, Carolyn?
I do agree. And I think, I don't know, I think it's hard in a sense of like, documentation is so important in that like you need to be able to use the product. Like you could literally, I think it's like you go to a product and if there's minimal or no documentation, like maybe there are developers out there. I mean, there's a lot of people who are like builders or tinkerers who want to like problem solve in that way. But I think for people who maybe are more like me and are doing it as a job and just want to like be able to be productive with what they're given, I think having docs are crucial in that sense. Also, I mean, you can optimize docs for things like SEO so that you can rank better and be able to show up when people are looking for things, or have maybe guides that are about concepts that are bigger than your specific product. And then you're able to educate people about a topic as well as your product. So I totally agree.
I thought it was interesting in some ways to kind of like see how some of the replies that I was getting were focused not necessarily on you know how good the documentation was, but how much it had improved. So I have this new philosophy that I'm gonna do, which is that I'm going to every open source project that I'm gonna launch, I'm going to launch it with absolute garbage documentation. And then when people are frustrated and sad and upset, then I will improve it. It's like a negging kind of thing. I don't know. What do you think? Would that work?
Are you asking me? Because I'm going to tell you no.
Absolutely not.
Please don't. Please.
All right. Well,
point and real points as well.
I'm glad that I have at least honest friends. They might not like me very much, but at least they're honest. So, you know, that's good. All right. Floor is open. It's a fireside chat. We don't have a fire, but you know, this is really an opportunity for all of you to plug anything you have or to say hello to your mom who you haven't seen for months. You know, what's on your mind? Anyone?
Definitely hi to my mother, because I haven't seen her for 15 months now. So
wow.
Yeah. But I'm pretty sure she's not watching this. She's probably in church. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah, also hi to my mother. I haven't seen her for many months as well. I had all the opportunities to, but I just chose not to. I don't really know what to say about that other than, you know, I hope she's not watching.
I mean, I guess I'll also say hi to my mom. She's 1,000% not watching, but maybe I'll send her this clip. Hi, Mom.
That was really cute, though.
The sun is.
I mean, I could probably also barge in. My mom is probably not gonna understand even what I'm saying, but still.
Yeah, I have a similar problem. I think my mom's been learning English. I'm very proud of her, actually. She's improved a lot. But that's like my defense is like, you know, as a child growing up in Finland, you know, speaking English was like a secret language, but it wasn't that very hard or like that very secret because everybody else in the world could speak it. So it was literally just a weapon that I could use against my parents as like a tool of teenage angst. You know, really useful. If there's any young people watching, you should try this. My parents loved it at least.
Yeah, that has worked for me as well. So my parents are originally from Nigeria, and they actually come from a part of Nigeria called the Niger Delta. They've got a special language, it's called Ijaw. I'm not so fluent at it, but when I'm back in London, my little nieces, they have no idea what this language is about. So if I want to talk to my sisters, I want to talk to their mum, and I want to say things that I do not want them to hear, or for example, if I want to swear, I just generally go with the language, and they're like, "What he's saying?" Everyone is laughing, but they don't get it. So it's more like it's a secret language in that sense. And even if I would love them to learn it because it helps us connect back to our roots. I also kind of selfishly, I'm kind of selfishly happy that they don't know how to speak it, because then it's like a secret way to communicate with my folks as well. Yeah.
So Carolyn, you're now, you're based in Germany, right? But you're working for a Finnish company, I understand?
Yeah, so I'm in Berlin. Hello. But yeah, my company is technically like founded and based in Helsinki. So, or I guess maybe technically founded in Espoo, one of the suburbs, but our office is in Helsinki.
Places in Finland.
Yeah?
Yeah, Espoo. Everybody knows. Just ask people from Espoo what they think of people from Vantaa, and then okay. you'll see how nice and lovely the people are. They'll just, you know, perfect neighbors.
All right, I'll use it in my stand-up tomorrow. I'll be like, oh yeah, Vantaa. Oh, it's great. I don't even think I said it right, and you just said it. But yeah, so I go to Helsinki, at least back in the day. Like, I've gone the couple times the past few months, and I don't know. I like it. If I had it my way, I would move to Helsinki. But my partner used to live in Sweden, and let's say he didn't like the darkness, is I think the way he always puts it. I also don't like snow, so that might be a problem.
Yeah, I think the darkness thing is kind of like if you have that darkness in your soul, then you'll also appreciate it in your surroundings. But then if you are like a normal, healthy person, then, you know, it might not, you know, really just gel so much with your kind of, you know, I think it's like important thing in life generally is to just get yourself in places where your insides and outsides kind of match.
Yeah. I'm born and raised in Seattle, Washington in the US, and it's cloudy 90% of the year, I feel like. So I like the sunshine, like even right now, it's a little bit like, it's a little bit bright for me. So I would love it. I would love it. And everything is so well designed in Helsinki. It has the best Muji I've ever seen in a mall that has a grocery store in it. Like, I
love Muji.
it.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It's so good. You like take the escalator in Campi and then you're just all of a sudden.
And the whole floor is yours, exactly.
Exactly. I love it.
Wait,
you guys have no idea what we're talking about.
I'm sorry.
The conversation took like a totally different direction here.
No. This is great. Margarita, you know, we have about 3 minutes left. Would you just like to talk to us about how much you love Muji for 3 minutes?
I mean, it's I mean, Carolyn has been there and she's totally impressed. So maybe she's the one to like spread the admiration here. But yeah, it's a very nice store. I recommend if you're in Helsinki, visit it and get a lot of stuff from here.
It's an immersive experience. Like like exactly what Margarita said, like the whole floor is yours. There's a cafe inside, there's a grocery store, there's clothing. Like you could live there. Anything you want is there. I would live there. I don't have that kind of budget, but I would live there if I could. In the mall in Muji.
Okay.
Also Helsinki.
Yeah.
But
this live stream is sponsored by Muji. Muji, go get your stuff at Muji.
They also have crickets there. Fun fact, like dried crickets that you can eat. It's really good.
I mean, I understand the expression "can eat," but I didn't understand why you want to eat them.
Yanni, your expression was priceless when she said that.
Because it's like hip and full of protein, Yanni.
You know what else is hip and full of protein? Goddamn tofu. And it does. Yeah. I can't believe I'm this person who has to say this, but I believe it is the law that in my circumstance, I have to disclose this fact. I have recently, 5 months ago, I have gone vegan.
I knew it. I knew you were going to say it.
And there's no joke there. There's no point to it. It's just like, I think, you know, by law, we are required as vegans, you know, to tell people about that. And it's like, you know, one thing about that I don't understand about veganism is like, you know, the marketing department isn't doing a very good job. Like, you know, like vegans are so annoying by and large that like we ruined the word. And now we have to be like plant-based. But I don't really know, like plant-based doesn't sound very sexy. Like I think there definitely is like an angle to it that, you know, is more than plant-based. Because it sounds like, I don't know, like one of those like office plants. It doesn't really entice me to eat it. I don't know.
Well, some of my vegan friends told me that they've tried my vegan pasta and that's one of the best vegan pasta they've tried. So you're welcome to come by my house once you visit Helsinki and try it and see. Maybe I can be the good vegan version to like spread the word and the recipes around.
And just to clarify, are you saying that to me or are you saying that to all of the people who are watching this live stream? Because
I'm from Ukraine. I'm very welcoming person. You can come by my house and try the food I'm cooking.
Can we come every day?
No.
Yeah, I do miss Finland, and like I think one of the saddest things about you know this this wonderful conference that we are now doing remotely. I would have loved to have it in Finland because it's an opportunity for me to visit back home. But also it drives people from all over the world together. Some of the speakers that we had planned for this year's conference are, you know, just from all over the world. And like I, as a proud Finn, you know, I always take pleasure in making them eat lihapiirakka and, you know, drink, you know, salmiakki. And, you know, this is an opportunity. So opportunity missed. So if anybody really wants the Finnish spirit, then just like go and get some ammonium chloride and mix it with some sugar and like, I don't know, charcoal dust, and drink that. And, you know, just, you know, let us know in the comments how that went. And try not to die. But on that note, I think we're out of time on Fireside Chat. We'll be seeing all of you in just just a jiffy. But we're going to be moving to our first talk. So can we have slides up? All right. Well, I was hoping to have a little wave from you, but I'm sure that you're waving at me right now in your hearts. Without further ado, we'll be lining up our first talk in a few minutes. For those who didn't manage to catch our start before the fireside, I'll repeat some of the practical information and also bits and bobs that we didn't get to. So, without further ado, this is React Finland MiniConf number 1. Today's theme will be documentation. We'll be running a number of these, somewhere between 6 and 8 perhaps. These are essentially a replacement on the React Finland 2020 conference. But we do, want to take advantage of this new format, the fact that you can sort of, participate from home. And the way that this works is that we have a very, very sort of like a big interactive element. If you're watching us on YouTube, unfortunately, you won't be able to see some of those live. We'll be uploading the Q&As and the panel online later, and on the breaks between talks, you'll be watching promotions from our sponsors. But if you are one of the ticket holders, either the React Finland 2020 or one of the people who has supported us by buying the React MiniConf pass, we are going to be answering your questions regarding these talks and any documentation related questions on the React Finland Slack. So go to react-finland.fi and find the Slack link, join the Slack, and in there you can find a channel called RF 2020 MiniConf Documentation Q&A. Any questions you drop in there, we'll try to get to during the speaker Q&As, and whatever we don't, we will inspire our panel discussion at the end. Now, remember that on Slack, we are interacting with other humans, even though they might not, look more than just lines of text. And this event, as always, is committed to providing a friendly, safe, and welcoming environment for all, regardless of your gender, sexual orientation, ability, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, religion, or lack thereof. If you want more details, you can read the Berlin Code of Conduct by going to berlincodeofconduct.org or Googling the name. And if there are any issues, please do reach out on the conference Slack to one of the organizers, Juho Vepsäläinen, Mikael Novikov, or Harri Määttä. And before we start, just a quick hello from our sponsors who make this wonderful production possible. Our gold sponsors this year are Go4, who offer expert knowledge in digitalization. We have another gold sponsor, Futurist, who is your partner in co-creating a resilient future. And Futurist might not actually know this, but they are sponsoring this event in one more way than they thought. I used to work there years ago, and this microphone that I'm using right now is stolen from the Futurist London office. If you want it back, you can come and get it. And finally, Smartly.io powers beautifully effective ads on the internet. So please do check out our gold sponsors. They are really integral in making this event happen. We also have silver sponsors, Digia, Elisa, Alma, and Columbia Road, and our bronze sponsors, Quensic, Vincent, Wonder, I'm so sorry, Cybercom Group, and Netum, and more about those later. But now, we're about to start. We're 15 seconds over time. Just note that we are having a conference in 2021, hopefully in person. I will tell you more about those later. And now, let's give the floor to Carolyn Stransky talking about humanizing your documentation. Take it away, Carolyn. Let's go.
All right, so my name is Carolyn, and I'm a software developer based in Berlin, Germany. I'm currently working at a machine learning startup called Mishkin, which is actually based in Helsinki. And I'm also a Mozilla tech speaker. It's important to note, though, that before I was a developer, I was a technical writer. So this topic is very near and dear to my heart. So today I'm here to talk about making our docs more human-friendly. We're going to cover a lot in the next 30 minutes. So I've left this link where it has every article or talk that I mention, and I will also share it again at the end. So sit back, relax, it'll be fun. And for the sake of this talk, we're going to focus on external facing documentation. So the information that describes your product to its users. All right, let's get going. I want to start with a question. Why do we even write documentation? Is it because someone told us to do it, like our managers or the acceptance criteria on our ticket? Or is it because we actually want to help the people using our products accomplish their goals? Writing documentation tends to be an afterthought and something that we just kind of get done. But what if we decided to take the same approach, or what if we decided to approach documentation with the same care and consideration that we give the features we ship? Those questions lay the foundation for what's known as use case-driven documentation. Use case-driven documentation derives from the concept of goal-driven documentation, both of which were coined and made popular by Tyner Blaine in 2006. And it works like this. Make your users' goals the focal point of your docs, instead of just describing interface elements from left to right. To illustrate why having a goal-centric approach is important, Tyner Blaine uses the example of a power drill. They say that if you were to document this drill the same way that most document software, we'd end up with something like this. How to adjust the speed, how to change the direction of the drill, how to change the drill bit. So now you know how to operate the drill, but you don't actually know how to accomplish anything with it. These are examples of what's called reference docs. They're information-oriented, describe the machinery, and they're usually accurate. But if we change our perspective and focus on what it takes to do the job and not just use the tool, we could end up with something like this. How to drill a hole in a flat surface, whether it's wood or metal. How to select the right screw for fastening items. How to stir paint with your drill. Suddenly, the documentation is helping us achieve our goals. To begin to understand why this approach is successful, we need to think about that first question. Why do we even write documentation? And perhaps more importantly, we should be asking, who do we write documentation for? And the answer is pretty straightforward. Humans. Yes, with the development of sophisticated bots and AI, this answer could change pretty soon. But for now, most software documentation is written with the idea that humans will read it. And humans need that guidance that documentation is meant to provide. That's why those same principles from the drill can apply to our products as well. Yes, we want to write documentation to teach someone how to work our software, sure. But we also want to be teaching them how to achieve their goals and solve their problems using our software. So let's apply this to something a little bit more applicable to our industry, say Slack. Because I know they have a developer portal, I crawled their site for examples a while back. And these were a few of the titles that I found. As expected, we have those information-oriented reference docs. They teach us about making our messages interactive, how to subscribe to event types, and the differences between the events API and the real-time messaging API. That's nice, but even as someone who uses Slack daily, I'm still not sure why I would need any of these functions. So this is a probably outdated screenshot from the same docs, just a different page. But notice how they are not only giving us use cases, create simple workflows, build bots, but they're also outlining what we can accomplish. We can create that simple workflow by having our app respond to users' activities, or we can build a bot to automate tasks. Plus, they point you to those reference docs that were from the previous slide. Now that we generally understand what use case-driven documentation is, let's look at a high-level outline of this idea. When you want to develop a use case, you typically start with a goal. Then, if you're using use case-driven development or something similar, the rest of your workflow could look something like this. You'll define the functional requirement, you'll design the product, and then you'll implement the feature. What most documentation is doing, however, is starting at the implementation phase. It's once you've already finished that feature, and this is okay, it works, the docs get done. But what a use case driven approach is proposing is that we start here at, maybe you guessed it, the use case. The beauty of this is that you can design your documentation simultaneously with the features that you're developing. When we use a structured approach like this, we have established a framework for defining the problems that our software will solve. We articulate how people solve those problems with use cases, and then those use cases define exactly what we need to document. So this is cool, but it doesn't usually happen like this, even with the best intentions. One of the problems is that this use case-driven approach requires a fundamental change to how your team tackles documentation. Also, those reference docs, the ones that only explain what the software can do, they're actually the reasons why docs have such a bad rep in this industry, because they tend to be pretty dry and leave us wanting more. I know this feeling all too well from when I was first learning JavaScript. Before taking a proper course, I found it really difficult to learn JavaScript. It was literally like, what the hell is going on? Why is this so confusing? And like, seriously, do people actually enjoy this? I still wonder about the last one sometimes, but I just kept running into documentation that left me feeling completely deflated after. There was a lot of unexplained jargon and assumed knowledge, and a lot of times my questions were still left unanswered. And I noticed that this hasn't really changed, even though I now feel proficient with JavaScript. So this experience, plus feeling slightly underappreciated back when I was a technical writer, left me with the impression that nobody actually wants to read documentation. Because I certainly didn't. Plus, it's true that people typically visit docs when they're feeling frustrated with the software and they're disappointed that they haven't been able to solve the problem on their own. Recognizing and validating these feelings in technical writing is really important. These emotions frame the reader's perspective, and therefore they should be shaping the mood of our docs. But now that I'm deep into the developer world, I also realize that this statement isn't entirely true either. What I have realized is that people don't mind reading, and they might even be thankful for your docs, as long as they're actually helpful. Or, I mean, really at least more helpful than they are confusing. But a lot of documentation isn't. And that's why it's still a huge pain point for many developers. If you search the term reading docs on Twitter, you'll see that most of the tweets aren't super positive. Here are some that I found a while back. Hi, I was reading your documentation and you described this data in 2 different ways, which is correct. Thank you. The way it works is third completely different description. And Ethan actually told me that this was from a large organization. You might know them. They do a lot of work with like space. So just because an organization is large and has resources doesn't mean it magically gets better. Next one, the process of learning how to write a plugin. 1, read the docs. 2, get console log output. 3, read more. 4, try literally anything else. 5, get errors. 6, read more docs. 7, read existing plugin source. 8, notice it's written completely differently than what the docs say. And 9, cry a little. Honestly though, I go through a similar journey, except the crying comes like much, much earlier. And my personal favorite, bad documentation is bad. And even after someone asked if there were no docs, would it be better? Lee still said, deep thoughts. Honestly, yes, because it would waste less of my time. So yeah, people love to hate documentation, but that's because most of the documentation they're finding isn't fulfilling their needs. Back when I was a technical writer, I used to think that if only I could convince developers to care more, then they'll think about how they craft documentation as deeply as I did. I was like this sort of like weird documentation evangelist that no one asked for. But again, now that I'm a developer full-time, I know that that's also just not always possible. Because even if a developer really cares, they're almost never going to have the time to think about things like comprehensive learning journeys, doc app content architecture, or debate over every little word if their job doesn't have the word writer in it. But there are small, tangible actions that we can take to improve our documentation. And that's what I want to focus on for this talk. We can start by looking at the words we are writing. So a few days ago, I was listening to an old episode of the Write the Docs podcast featuring technical writer Lucy Lenore. And she made some really good points about why the words we choose in our docs matter. She mentioned how word choice can go a long way in promoting inclusion, and we'll cover some of that today. But she also mentioned that as documentation becomes more advanced, like particularly through artificial intelligence and helper bots, this word choice will play a large role in how these tools learn and the subsequent materials that they'll create. And we want those to be as neutral and inclusive as possible. So that's all to say that this topic matters, whether you approach it from a more human perspective or a technical one. Anyway, back to the practical stuff. So most importantly, we want to make sure that these words that we choose are optimized for comprehension. One blocker to this goal is insensitive language. And this one can be tricky because across nationalities and personalities, insensitive phrasing or wording can mean a lot of different things. In this case, it includes profanity and pretty much anything that would break a code of conduct. Take this for example. If the programmer wishes to uphold the invariant, he must satisfy the function's preconditions. Now, you might think that gendered language is a relatively tame example, but even so, it can have negative effects on the members of your community and their own sense of belonging. In software development, we also have these problematic, dated, and mostly racist terms that we're still using even though it's 2020. Terms like master and slave or whitelist and blacklist. A good rule to follow is that when documenting code, you don't want to make any assumptions about race, gender, religion, political orientation, or anything else that isn't relevant to the project. For the previous examples, we can use the alternatives primary and replica, or deny list and allow list. I've also heard that block list and safe list works pretty well as well. And not only are these less racist, but they actually better describe their purpose through their semantics. But there's so much more than those 4 words that we need to watch out for. And I understand that it can be a lot to think about. So I have a linter for you. So AlexJS catches insensitive, polarizing writing in your Markdown files. You can use it on the command line or as an integration with Atom, VS Code, or even Slack. It's also open source, so if you notice it's not catching something you think it should, you can submit a pull request. Here are those same examples from earlier, but now Alex is helping us catch those words that are better left out of our docs, as well as suggesting alternatives. I wouldn't recommend AlexJS for all types of writing because it does flag identity terms, like queer, for example, but it's great for technical documentation because for most cases, those shouldn't be present anyway. And because we're developers and have a tendency to want to automate everything, it's important to warn that linters aren't a replacement for human editing. And just because you're using a linter that will flag these quote unquote insensitive terms doesn't mean you shouldn't still educate yourself on why those terms are harmful. For that, I'd recommend checking out Tatiana Mack's Self-Defined Dictionary. It seeks to provide more inclusive and holistic definitions to reflect diverse perspectives. What I like about it is that it explains the issue with a particular word or phrase, the impact that it has on various communities, and also some alternatives. Plus, it's also open source. Next, kind of on the same topic, but saying simply or easy in our documentation. So Jim Fisher opened the 2018 edition of Write the Docs Prague conference with a talk on this exact topic. At one point, he searched for the word simply on GitHub and found over 92 million references to it in documentation. which is wild because when you think about it, if you've been stuck on a problem, do you really want to read something that describes it as simple? What we can do is ban isolating words like easy, simple, obviously from our docs. This is already common practice for many technical writers, and we can use these practices to be more mindful of the words that we're choosing. If you're struggling to find alternatives, Jim Fisher, who I mentioned earlier, has some suggestions. We can be more specific. Maybe your product is easy because it's quick to set up or doesn't require much custom configuration. If that's the case, say so. Or you can be comparative. Something is smaller than something else or requires fewer steps to create. You can also be absolute. It takes 5 lines of code to integrate this with your project. When you suggest being absolute, lots of people immediately jump to time as a measurement to show how easy something is, like launch a website in 10 minutes, build your own server from scratch in 30 seconds, etc. In this case, it's recommended to show and not tell. If you think it really takes 5 minutes to set up your tool, I would challenge you to make a video and see if that number still holds. Jim did this during his talk, and let's just say it proved the point. If we want to enforce this rule, we can also use a linter. Linters are very popular technical writing. So the AlexJS linter that I mentioned earlier also finds these terms, but I wanted to provide you with another option as well. WriteGood is another linter for English prose, and it's available as a command line tool, and I think someone recently wrote a VS Code plugin for it. Once installed, you can run this command to do a general check on all Markdown files. It automatically flags for simply and easily, and you can also write a custom check to look out for other problematic words that your team frequently uses. For instance, I know a team that created one to scan for the word just. The next one might be the most common. So often what I see in documentation is that there will be these like long, verbose chunks of text with bloated language. And by this, I mean overly complicated prose that are difficult to understand on the first read, particularly for those who might have a learning disability or aren't reading in their native language. We want to choose our language intentionally, and using plain language is crucial for more inclusive documentation. One tool that we can use to make sure our language isn't too complicated is Hemingway Editor. So here you can paste in your text and it'll highlight problematic words and sentences for you. It flags mainly long, complex sentences, unnecessary words, or words with a simpler alternative. The main downside is that it uses color and the mouse over event to distinguish these fields, which isn't the most accessible. But you'll also almost never completely satisfy it, but that's okay. What's most important to note is that on the right-hand side, you can see a readability score, and we want to keep that down to a maximum of a grade 8. And don't ever worry about the reading score being too low, because as the amazing Ashley Bischoff once said, no one has ever complained that something was too easy to read. And actually, if you want more tangible examples of plain language in writing, check out her talk from Frontiers. It's gold. Unexpected errors are another common issue people face. And while we can't necessarily prevent this through our documentation alone, we can make it better by considering and addressing common errors if you know them. So this helps reassure users that mistakes happen, and it provides options for troubleshooting. So when you're writing about these errors, you want to try to explain what might happen and why, and then tell the reader what to do next. This is a screenshot from the Apple II Basic Programming Manual from, yes, the 1970s. It tackles the nuances of common user errors quite well, explaining syntax errors before you even start to code. This tells us what happened. We got a beep in the syntax error message. Why? We pressed return. And what to do next? Ignore it. When formatting these error alerts in a tutorial, Django Girls is a great resource to reference. These notes are scattered throughout the tutorial, and the clear formatting enables it to be informative without being distracting for those who might not be encountering those errors. I've also seen like collapsible error messages work quite well. And finally, when it comes to our writing, you might be in too deep. So imagine you work for hours and hours, week after week, to build this product. You become so familiar with it to the point that you don't even cognitively recognize the core concepts as you're working with them. So then when you go back to document the product, you forget to take that step back and you write the docs as if you're talking to yourself. But the problem is that first-time users won't have the same frame of reference. So any unexplained term or skipped step in the process can really destroy that learning journey for your reader. What you need to remember is that no matter how intuitive you think your tool might be or how advanced you think your users are, everyone starts somewhere and everyone is a beginner at some point in time. What I found to be effective is to go through the entire process from start to finish and talk out loud while you're doing it. At the same time, have another colleague, preferably someone who's not working on the same project, take notes about what you're doing and points where they might be confused or things that are unclear. Next, I want to touch on something that is almost equally as prevalent in documentation as words, and that's code. Code snippets are understandably very common in documentation, so we should give them just as much care as the text that we write. I'll start by pointing out that code snippets should never be screenshots. This is for accessibility reasons, sure. Without any alt text, the code is unreadable for those using assistive technologies. But logically speaking, it's much more in your favor to write out the code. That way people can copy and paste it to try it themselves or even interact with the code if you have some sort of playground embedded in your docs. As an alternative to screenshots, we can follow semantic HTML principles and use a code tag for inline code. For example, if you're mentioning a specific function name within a written sentence. Then if we want to expand into an entire block of code, we can use the pre element. That way the text is formatted exactly as it's written in the HTML file. And this is what's being used when you use those like triple backticks in Markdown. And speaking of Markdown, code blocks are part of the Markdown spec, as I just mentioned, but syntax highlighting isn't necessarily. So, however, some renderers, like GitHub, do support syntax highlighting, but what you have to do is write the language name after the backticks. Another issue that pops up in code snippets are these like nondescript variable names. This is because foo, bar, baz, insert another 3-letter word here, have no context or any sort of indicator for what they could be representing, which means that our readers are more likely to lose their understanding. The same applies for a single letter variable name unless it's really explicitly explained. Instead, we want to use meaningful placeholders and use those as tools for teaching. In a discussion about this, Ellie, a developer based in London, once said, "We can have variable names that are both meaningful and generic, that expose their purpose via their semantics." She uses the example of an array, and I want to dig into that a bit further. Here's an array named Baz with 2 items, foo and bar. Say I'm learning what arrays are and how to work with them. These variable names are way too abstract. So instead, we can name our array list of fruits and call those items apples and oranges, apples and bananas. I don't know, some sort of fruit, whatever I wrote on there. So this is descriptive and I understand what's going on, but we don't even need to take it that far. You could also name the array something like array name and then list item 1 and item 2. It's not the most creative, but at least it's promoting comprehension. So now that we've covered the literal words and code that we will write in our docs, I also want to briefly talk about maintaining our documentation, whether it's individual articles or doc apps overall. Structure and hierarchy are essential for this. When you work as a technical writer, typically the first thing you learn is that well-structured content is the best foundation for great documentation. But again, it's more of an ideal than a reality in many cases. but it's important to consider because the structure of our docs shape that learning journey and overall experience for our readers. So we want to make sure we have a clear structure that they're able to follow. And when you're writing and in doubt, you can aim for something like this. Talk about one specific feature, go on to explain the use cases, and finally offer solutions for tooling, integrations, etc. This covers all of your bases. You have those information-oriented docs that explain the feature, goal-oriented, because by showing use cases that could either maybe inspire your readers or address their needs directly. And then you can suggest tools that will lead the reader to what you believe that they should learn next. And the final issue I'm going to cover today is an issue of fit. The product you're documenting isn't appropriate for the person reading, and this causes confusion. So what we can do is we can be transparent. When you know there's a specific use case that doesn't work, say something. You'll save people a lot of headaches in the long run, and I promise that it won't destroy your business. In your introductory material, for instance, you can remind people to double check that this tool is appropriate for what they're actually doing. The Reason documentation does this well. In their Converting from JavaScript page, they emphasize that you should make sure Reason fits your needs. It also points out that you shouldn't, quote, unnecessarily thrash your colleagues over their languages or framework choices. But for the record, that is always unnecessary. So I hope I've given you a new tool to implement or maybe ways to update your existing documentation checklists. But before I stop talking, I want to leave you with one last thing that I learned during my time as a technical writer. So back in the days, I worked at a company called Contentful in Berlin. And when I first read through their style guide, something immediately struck me. At the very beginning, it says, "We aim for accuracy and consistency." Sure, this is the case for most documentation, but what really got me was what came next. More importantly, we aim to be honest, helpful, and human. Honest in that we communicate the pros and cons of a solution because in doing so, we build trust. Helpful, we want our users to succeed. Their success is ultimately our success. And human, we want to feel familiar and approachable. Because after all, you and anyone else reading or writing your documentation are humans too. So thank you. So here's that list of resources again. And if you want to chat about any of these things, I'm available on Twitter. And I'm excited to see what questions come up. And that's the end.
I like to work at Columbia Road because I get to work in really interesting client cases, use cool technologies, and I get to choose my own tools.
I also like varying projects. I won't be stuck with any specific tech stack.
I like Columbia Road because it's a crossroad between the technology and business.
Working here is challenging but interesting at the same time.
I love how we always strive for excellence.
I love that people are helping each other so actively. Whenever you need help, you just ask in Slack and there's multiple people who will answer you.
Our equality, transparency, and the opportunities to learn more.
I like the flexible working hours.
I love my coffee breaks.
I
really like high quality green tea and coffee at the office.
We know when to be serious, and we also know when not to be serious.
Of course, the parties are good.
Covered afterworks and yellow trains.
Singing 90s rap karaoke at our afterworks.
I love people on Columbia Road. They are so nice and awesome.
I feel like I'm working with my friends.
A sense of family and community.
Fantastic colleagues.
The most fun and the most professional people in the industry.
I like the amazing people that we have.
The people.
People and the atmosphere.
Documentation. Yes, documentation. It's always a work in progress, true. But now, seriously, at Wonder we have some common sense processes about writing documentation. Let's highlight 5 of them. We use the README file with instructions on how to get the project running. We keep it simple. We have a Google Doc called Doc Index for every project, because clients or project managers not always have a GitHub account. We use Jira Ticket ID in our commit messages and branches. This way we can always trace back the discussions to Jira, make our Git history and changelogs more useful. And finally, at Wonder we try to improve the documentation when onboarding someone new to the project or moving the project to maintenance. No one likes to land in a project with outdated documentation. And now let's move on to things we could do better. Types is a form of documentation. We are starting to use more TypeScript in React projects. We already use a lot of GraphQL, so this is bread and butter. We document some best practices in our intranet, but I'm a big fan of learning in public. We could share and write more in public, definitely. We use ESLint for coding, but why not for documentation too? AlexJS for improving the documentation. So this is something we could improve also in Wonder. And that's all. I hope to listen more tips from the speakers of React Finland, and let's discuss more in Slack.
T-minus 30 seconds.
We are here today at the Rise of Futulam in Tampere 2019. That's where the societal impact, learning and personal growth come together.
We have a successful launch of Futulam 2019. Catering is reporting that the beer chill-down procedure is proceeding nominally and the coffee machines are loading.
Every morning when I wake up, I think about the colleagues I get to work with every day. I'm really proud of the team that I'm in right now. Every day in Digia, I get to come in and face new challenging programming issues that we have. So I really like that about the workplace. In the current project, I get to work with very hot topics, which is on the market right now. There's, for example, microservices they talk about a lot, and also cloud computing, etc. If you're still searching for your path in the technology space or want to try new technologies or push your career, I think Digia is definitely the place to apply for.
This is the ultimate IT brand film. The visuals are chosen by an AI, which analyzed dozens of other IT brand films. Hello, I am a deep male voice. Cybercom provides innovative IT solutions on a global scale. That's why this globe shoots out data. Pew, pew. We hope that this beautiful forest makes you associate beautiful Nordic nature with our company, because we too are Nordic and beautiful. Here at Cybercom, we like to keep our employees happy, and that's why all the paid actors in this video will be smiling, no matter where they are or what they're doing. And what does running have to do with IT? Well, not much. But it makes for some great emotional footage. We have offices in all sorts of places, including Helsinki, Copenhagen, Stockholm, and Warsaw. But there's no skyscrapers, so this is Shanghai. We do not have an office in Shanghai. To us, coding is art. But according to AI, it doesn't look cool enough. So this is a painter instead. Our coders get adequate compensation for their work, unlike many artists. AI suggests that we should show a person wearing virtual reality goggles. I think he should be wearing a helmet instead. And these don't exist out of sci-fi movies. Oh dear, still so much data. We have to speed things up now. Taj Mahal, supercar, cute kids, woodworking, what ballpark, what's going on? Well, that didn't work. Hey, maybe we should use the AI to actually do something useful.
You are learning many different ways that are going to be really useful in the future. Not just technology, but also like how to build a company, how to build a team, how to manage all of that. You have a lot of flexibility to deciding what kind of projects you want to work. You can move from team to team and work more focusing in front-end stuff if you want, or you can learn more about I don't know, like data science, for example. And Smartly offers really great opportunity if you want also to see the customer perspective. You can travel and meet these customers that are using your product, also participate in the events that we are organizing with that kind of customers. Me, myself, I have the opportunity to be also speaking in those conferences and talking about how we develop the product in Smartly, what are going to be new things that we are bringing on. Usually our customers are really, really advanced, so you always learn how to even bring the product forward, and you get really good feedback about the things that you do.
Moi, mä oon Mikko Kuitunen. Mä perustin Vincitin vuonna 2007 työpaikaksi, johon ei vituta mennä töihin, edes maanantaina. Tässä ollaan onnistuttu varmaan aika hyvin, kun kerran meidät valittiin Euroopan parhaaksi työpaikaksi. Alussa meitä oli 2, nyt jo monta sataa. Me toimitaan Hervannan lisäksi Helsingissä, Savonlinnassa ja Piilaaksossa. Saimme lentävän lähdön, mutta puoli vuotta perustamisen jälkeen ainoa asiakkaamme antoi tulosvaroituksen, lopetti hommat ja pian oltiinkin konkurssin partaalla. Kovalla työllä siitäkin selvittiin. Aina välillä joku pahoittaa mielensä meidän toiminnasta. Ollaan esimerkiksi haluttu palkata lisää naisia ja pidetty positiiviset YT-neuvottelut. No, jos kukaan ei suutu, mikään ei muutu. Vincitin bisnestä on palvelumuotoilu, ohjelmointi ja muut ATK-palvelut. Ja me ollaan saatu toteuttaa todella mielenkiintoisia projekteja. Kerron muutaman esimerkin. Lähes kaikista maailman sairaaloista löytyy lääketieteellisiä härveleitä, joita ollaan oltu toteuttamassa. Sitä paljon puhuttua IoT:tä tehdään muun muassa Metson kivenmurskaimille ja muille liikkuville työkoneille. Oral-hammaslääkäreiden ollaan oltu vahvasti mukana. Superoperaattor autopesuloiden kaikki teknologia on meidän kehittämää. Sitä on käytössä Suomen lisäksi muissa Euroopan maissa, Australiassa ja Jenkeissä. Myös Hesen mobiilisovellus on meidän tekemä. Sillä pystyy kätevästi ohittamaan jonon. Vincit muuten on latinaa ja tarkoittaa voittamista ja valloittamista. Ja sitähän me ollaan tehty. Kasvamista tärkeämpää on kuitenkin se, että meillä on aina huomenna tyytyväisemmät asiakkaat ja tyytyväisemmät työntekijät kuin tänään.
With me. We're gonna head to the next talk now, and then I'll see you at the panel.
Bye.
Bye. Our next talk is called Documentation in Legacy React Code, a love-hate paradigm. There's a lot of strong feelings in this title, and I think that's quite understandable because legacy code does tend to invoke a lot of feelings. So let's give the stage to Kenigbolo Meya Stephen and his talk on the topic. Let's go.
I'm Kenigbolo Meya Stephen. I'm a front-end engineering lead at Bigcaster and also a front-end architect with HouseSpace. And I also work as an independent consultant in general for front-end engineering, software engineering, and documentation as well. But today I'm here because I love documentation, docs for short, and I'm going to be talking about it. You can find me on Twitter at ExpensiveStevie. Do not ask me about that handle. I try not to answer that question. But yeah, what we'll be looking at today, we're going to be talking about what is documentation, what is legacy code, documentation and legacy code in React, how to navigate the murky waters, and then tips on how to make your React docs better. And lastly, we will have a brief summary. But for now, let's dive in. So what is documentation? I have a short quote here which says it's a pathway to your source code. However, we're going to be looking at it in a more distinctive way. So according to Wikipedia, which is not the greatest of sources, but a source I consider to be more general in this case, it says software documentation is written text or illustration that accompanies computer software or is embedded in the source code. Now, documentation either explains how the software operates or how to use it. And this may mean a lot of different things to different people. And what documentation means to an end user might be different from what it means to a software engineer or to a product manager, for example. But in React, our docs that we usually use are mostly either system documentation, and system documentation focuses on documents that describe the system and its relevant parts. This can include requirement documents, design decisions, architectural decisions, descriptions of the source code, and a lot of other things as well. Your FAQs can also be considered to be system documentation. And then we have the user documentation. This generally focuses on manuals prepared for end users of a specific product, or as well, it can be for system administrators. This could include tutorials, for example, which include code snippets in your docs. They could be user guides, they could be troubleshooting manuals, for example, installation or reference manuals, as the case may be. Now, let's look at legacy code. This is a very interesting concept in software engineering, a concept that we flog quite difficult as well. The greatest software engineering fallacy is that legacy code is bad code. And yes, I said it. A lot of the times we tend to categorize legacy code as bad code, which is not always the case. Now, I'm not saying that every legacy code is good. No, by no means. However, in a lot of cases, the legacy code are not necessarily bad code, as we might want to categorize them or classify them, as the case may be. Now, there's no universal definition for legacy code. However, in the context of this talk, I'll see it and we'll be looking at it as code that is no longer actively supported or code using libraries that are no longer actively maintained. Now, I have a few questions to ask. Is your code easy to change? Can you get nearly instantaneous feedback when you change it? Do you understand it? If the answer to any of these questions is no, we could easily classify your code as legacy code as well. And for what it's worth, it's probably draining time, money away, and efforts from your development team. However, when we look at legacy code in the scope of teams, it's mostly features that are either no longer supported or have been superseded, typically combined with little or no possibility to ever replacing them. And by them, I mean the code. A lot of the times you just use legacy code until the system dies. We can also say legacy code is code that has been inherited from someone or somewhere else, or possibly from an older version of a library. How do you categorize code as legacy? Actively supported. Is the code still actively supported in terms of development, or is it being used in maintenance mode at the moment? Is this how you categorize your legacy code? Is it based on the libraries maintained? Is the library or group of libraries used in the project or source code being actively maintained? Does this define legacy code for you? And the interesting one, code you're not comfortable changing. Do you categorize code as legacy because it's inherited and you're not comfortable changing it? A picture is worth 1,000 words. Almost every code base you would work on would probably be inherited. And we could easily term that as legacy if we go according to some definitions. However, it's important to remember and realize that the code you write today is possibly going to become legacy code tomorrow. And with that, I would like to get into documentation and legacy code in React. This is more of a beta suite paradigm, and I'm going to be trying to look at both the beta part and the suite part. But of course, I prefer to have the good news first. So let's look at the good part of all of this. Now, is there legacy code in React? If you have ever worked on any React code base written between the 0.13.x version and the 15.x versions, then in my opinion, you have dealt with a legacy React code base. You don't necessarily have to agree with me, but if you have dealt with one of these versions, you have either dealt with code that has actually been deprecated or some form of break-in changes. Definitely a handful of break-in changes and a ton of new and exciting features that have been shared with us. And for what is worth, I think it's important to say that React as a library is always going to be evergreen and ever new to me personally. So when people say is there legacy code in React, I kind of understand why this question will come because, of course, for someone who loves React, this is always going to be evergreen, and that's totally understandable. Now, for a bit of perspective, let's look at these numbers. 325,277,771. These are the total number of downloads between 2019, 05/20, the 20th of May, 2019, and 2020, 05/20, the 20th of May, 2020. Now, the source of this is from the NPM library. And whilst I can agree with you that NPM downloads of a library do not necessarily give perspective on usage, I'm quoting these figures here because by the time we have 17.x version of React, a handful of people who have downloaded the React library within this time frame and still have this source code in production are possibly going to be dealing with legacy code. And that's a huge number. And even if we take out the first figure there and say, okay, maybe it's 25 million downloads, that's still a number of legacy code bases that might just still be available. And this is why dealing with legacy code in React and having appropriate documentation is super important. Now, we're talking about the love-hate paradigm. So I'm going to start with the love paradigm. One of the beauties of dealing with legacy code is that there are a lot of great online resources. As you know, the React community is huge. So we also have a structured changelog in the official React repository, which enables you to see breaking changes and deprecations as well. Of course, we've got Stack Overflow to the rescue. I believe if you go on Stack Overflow and find all the topics listed with React, you will see a lot of questions that are necessarily not from the version you are actually using at the moment. And last but not the least, my personal favorite, Twitter. Now, you might not want to acknowledge this, and that's totally okay if you do not use Twitter, but we do share a lot of knowledge on Twitter. And sometimes when you're stuck with legacy code, it might just be easier sharing it on Twitter and listening to how people have actually dealt with it as well. Twitter is also one of the beauties of all of this. Now, let's look at the hate paradigm. Now, I know hate is a strong word, but we can as well call this the dislike paradigm. Deprecations. Now, yes, we know that a lot of people do not like deprecations because it usually means they need to stop using something. However, the process is that it's such that there are always specific kind of warnings with regards to this. So it's easier to actually be able to handle this. However, I do accept and agree and understand that this can be a pain in the ass for some people. Breaking changes. Now, as much as we might not like to have breaking changes, if we follow what semantic versioning is all about, there is a possibility that every major version might have a breaking change. So this is quite possible. And although you might not like it, there are always ways to mitigate the spot. So I know it can be annoying, but this can also be mitigated in a couple of ways. However, the absence of docs. Now, this is the one singular reason that can make working with legacy React code a total nightmare for you. And as if that's not enough, absence of proper project docs. So yes, you can have docs, but do the docs reflect the project that you're actually documenting? Because there's you writing documentation and there's you writing documentation that reflects your project. And last but not the least, absence of proper project docs. So yes, you have project documentation. Are they properly outlined? Do they communicate to the end user who's going to be using this documentation what your ideas are? This can also be a simple reason to hate working with legacy React code. So the absence of docs is what we're going to be focusing on today. And what we're going to try to do is to find ways to actually mitigate those challenges. One of the greatest challenges when it comes to working with legacy React code is the absence of documentation in projects. How does the code fit into the current and the past business case? What were the underlying reasons regarding the implementation? Now, when I refer to proper project docs, these are two important questions that you need to ask yourself. And like I mentioned, the code you write today is going to be legacy tomorrow. So how does the code fit into the current business case or use cases that you have? How does the code fit in the past business case or current business case that you have? What are the underlying reasons behind certain implementations you have? Why is this done this way? Can I take a look at it and say, okay, I totally understand that. Now I get that understanding in this case can be totally subjective and not something you can measure because it differs from person to person. But a simple baseline that says, I get the general idea based on how this is explained is actually very important. Now, if you start working with legacy React projects, you are lucky in situations where you have people to talk to and you have people to ask questions about this project. That's on the good side. The people who designed it, the people who wrote it are available. Now, imagine that they were not working on that code base anymore. They were no longer in the company, or something happened and they passed away. That entire knowledge base is gone because there is an absence of proper project documentation for this code base you're working on. And in reality, this wastes everyone's time. Knowledge transfer for newcomers would be more painful than it is. And we are trying to create an industry where people are welcome. The last thing we want is to create barriers, artificial barriers, with our lack of documentation. We all know that documentation is not given the attention it deserves, and this is no different, especially in legacy React projects. Now, let's find a way to navigate the murky waters. It's not all doom and gloom. There are always some ways to navigate legacy code in the absence of documentation. Now, I'm not trying to say it's going to be easy. I'm just saying there are certain steps you could take to ease the process for you. There just might be a way out. And I would like us to take a look at some suggestions on dealing with that. So, first of all, I want you to know that you've got this. When you get to that legacy project you need to work on, it's not going to be all doom and gloom. You've got this, and you can do it. First things first, let's look at the React version. This should ideally be visible in the README. You should state out the React version that the project is built with in the README. However, if it's not there, then you should dig a bit deeper into your package.json file, as well as your package lock.json and or yarn-lock, as the case may be, depending on what, if you use npm or you use yarn. Now, this is important because you get to know the exact version of React this project is built on. It sets the baseline for the rest things that are going to follow. The next thing you should do is check out for the deprecations. Now, a very important factor to consider when working with legacy React code is the deprecations across versions. Once you know the version in use, which is what the first step, getting the React version, do well to add it to the README file, clearly stating it if it's not there. And then go to the official React repository, find that version, and check out every deprecation or breaking change as the case may be. Note this down because this would help you in dealing with this code, and when you decide to do an update, it helps you in knowing exactly the paths to follow. Next thing, mixins. I know there has been a lot of talk about this. I've never been a fan, and for good reason. So scan the code to find if mixins are being used. Consider replacing these for higher ordered components. Now, an important caveat to put here is that higher ordered components are not a bulletproof replacement for mixins. However, I can say they're an amazing solution when integrating the seams of your legacy application with your new React world. They can help you solve a lot of problems. So this is something I suggest you also do. A lot of legacy React code do have mixins. This was a pattern that was used back then, still used in a couple of places, but we all know that this is probably not the best idea. Now, let's talk about state management also in this legacy code base without documentation. State management is also a very important and integral part of React projects. So this is something that you should put your eyes out for as well. States that are only used and modified within individual components should be localized to the needed components. Now, something I've noticed in a lot of legacy React code bases is that we take a lot of things and put them into the Redux store, for example. However, in a lot of cases, they do not need to be in any store. If the state is managed by the component and is changed or going to be handled by that given component, then it does not necessarily need to be in a global state or in a store. Look out for those, clear those pollution, and you might be doing yourself and your entire team a good favor, as well as getting hands-on in clearing a good path for migration to a much updated version. Now, class components. This is also a very interesting concept. Avoid the desire to instantly rewrite these into functional components as your first step. There's always the tendency to want to do this, but I would advise that when dealing with legacy React code, you go through the first 4 I've highlighted, which is finding the version, checking out for the deprecations and breaking changes, finding the mixins and changing those to higher order components, finding state, going through the state management and trying to localize states that are only modified, updated in specific components before coming to trying to rewrite your class components into functional components. Now, I understand and I totally agree. I'm pro functional components because they're much easier to read and definitely easier to test. And at the end of the day, they're just plain JavaScript functions anyways. They also give you the possibility to end up with less code. And in a lot of cases, they help you use best practices as well. So you definitely should do that, but that should not be the first thing you start doing when you take up a legacy React code base. Avoid the temptation to do that first. And the last tip would be the lifecycle hooks, which I consider very important. While these are useful, avoid the temptation of skipping this because some hooks are slated to be deprecated. Some hooks might be deprecated in 17.x as well. And then, of course, simple examples are cases where when you have component will mount, whilst dealing with your legacy code and moving your upgrade, this should be changed to component did mount, for example, or component will update to component did update. You know, a couple of when it comes to lifecycle hooks, they're quite tricky. So do not feel comfortable that, this is how they are and this is fine. The deprecation warnings are there. And if you look at the deprecation warnings, you would actually see and take note of all of this. So this is also super handy for dealing with legacy code. Now, I know that, like I mentioned earlier, it might seem daunting to actually deal with it, but legacy code is not necessarily bad code, and there are ways which you can handle this. And I've just listed a few tips that I consider very important when you have to deal with legacy code that does not have documentation at all. Again, this can apply to code that does have documentation, but it will be lesser in terms of what you need to look for. Now, it's not all rosy, for sure. I'm not going to lie to you. Dealing with legacy React code, especially when there's no documentation, can be daunting and most times just downright frustrating. However, these challenges can be mitigated and handled. There is a lot of legacy React code out there. Almost every code base you would work on will be probably mostly legacy. You can try to avoid it and feel bad when you're stuck with it, or you could see this as an opportunity to develop some valuable skills that helps your career as an engineer as well. And now let's focus on some tips on making your docs better. Now, I'm not going to be focusing on general best documentation practices. I'm going to be focusing on the little things you can do to make sure you do not end up in the same problem that you have when you're working with legacy React code. Now, I will try to center on how to encourage your team to write documentation, quite similar to the ways you will encourage people to write clean code, to do regular refactoring, to use design patterns, or to add enough unit tests. You can always use these tips to make people improve your docs or add documentation as well. You can do this. Trust me, you can. So good docs are equivalent to endorphins. Now, I would have changed this to be a little bit more JavaScripty and have the double equals to or the triple equals to, but I intentionally left this way because good docs are actually endorphins, and for what is what, endorphins are the chemicals released when you're happy, when you smile. For me, good docs are endorphins, and I believe for a lot of end users as well and engineers who are going to take the project, good docs are endorphins. Now, one of the ways to improve your docs for legacy project is by example, leading by example. Now, lead by example, if you write good documentation, your colleagues might just start picking up on it too. Your peers might start doing it. Everyone around you might pick up the habit. And I know because I've seen it work around me. So if you're an engineering lead or just a regular member of the engineering team, regardless of what end of the spectrum you are, just do it by example. And there's a possibility that others might follow. For engineering leads, you are in the best position to actually do this and have those who look up to you follow on as well. Systematic reviews. Having systematic code reviews targeted at inspecting your documentation will drastically improve the quality of your docs. In a lot of my talks on documentation, I have always stated that reviewing your docs as rigorously as you review your code is super important and gives you the possibility to have really good documentation. Measure. Now, this is subjective, but do you have some base measure for your documentation? Is it easy to set up? Subjective, because easy for one person might not be the same for the other person. Is it easy to understand? Easy is totally subjective. Is it easy to understand for one person or not easy to understand for the other person? The concept of measuring should be something you think about carefully before having in your docs. And if there is a measure you believe, you should have working examples of how to deal with measure. For example, if you say this is easy to set up in 5 minutes, show how it's easy to set up in 5 minutes. Give evidence of how that can be done in 5 minutes. You might be surprised at the end, but I challenge you to do that. Discuss openly. Now, this is something a lot of people take for granted, but I have discovered is super important in documentation as well. An important way to enforce the idea of documentation is to have open discussions about both the positives and the negatives of it. So this is also super important. Versions and patterns. I'm putting this here because it's also very important. Clearly document in the README section of your project what version you're using. And somewhere in your project it's important to show or explain why a certain pattern is being used or what patterns you're using. If you are more functional, you should write it. If you prefer to use object-oriented paradigm, you should somehow explain this to the end users, the consumers of these docs. Clear and concise naming. Now, this is the singular most complicated thing I have discovered in software engineering as a discipline. Naming is a very difficult aspect of programming. However, it plays a huge role in communication. And communication is an essential part of documentation. So please name your code, variables, and functions as clearly as possible. And that's it. I'm going to leave you with this. The code you write today is going to be legacy code tomorrow. Kiitos. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll be available. You can find me on Twitter at ExpensiveStevie and on GitHub at Kenigbolo. Thank you very much.
My name is Josef Hjelström. I'm a senior specialist here in Futurist Tampere office. My main area of focus is mobile applications. I've been developing different mobile applications, different platforms for almost 15 years and 3 years in Futures. We kind of take our job seriously, but on the other hand, we are kind of not taking ourselves too seriously. Lately I've been working in this like remote setup where we are doing a project for a German car manufacturer in cooperation with our Berlin and Helsinki teams. So we've been doing full stack web development with React and TypeScript and backend side with serverless AWS Lambda functions. That's been a really nice project. So we were actually in Berlin for 1 week, meeting the client and getting to know with other teams from Futures. So what makes me proud is being around these really talented individuals and being part of the company that really helps our clients to build something new. Best thing for working for Futures, in my opinion, is the people. There's so much talent that every day basically you learn something new here.
Software project documentation, of course, starts with the good old-fashioned readme.md. We have this README template that gives a nice structure and some hierarchy to the document, and it focuses on how to use the project and then how to contribute into it, how to develop, how to build, how to test, and so forth. For infrastructure, we try to draw these infrastructure diagrams that on a high level describe what building blocks are used, and then we write down also how they are deployed and where. For external documentation, we use a tool called Sphinx. It's a static site builder basically, so we get out of it a domain and maybe a password and things like that that we can share to external stakeholders that don't have access to our GitHub. Then for React.js components, we like to use a tool called React Storybooks, and the storybooks are nice. You can showcase your components there and how they work in different situations and how a configuration might affect them. Here's an example of theming in our login component. Then a nice thing with the storybooks is that we have these feature branches. So if a Git branch name starts with a string feature /, so our CI server deploys it into a new environment, into another subfolder, for example. So then we can share this feature branch to stakeholders. They can take a look how the new feature looks in the component. Then Git is important part of documentation and communication for a team. We try to do our best with good commits and good pull requests. Especially the pull requests are important. You have to define what's being done and give a clear context for the pull request. For that, we have defined this pull request template that specifies certain structure for the pull request. So the Jira ticket, what has been actually done, also the definition of done, that has it been tested, has the relevant documentation been updated, and also what's expected from the code reviewer. Do they just review the code, or should they install this branch and then also do manual testing on it, and so forth. Then we see types also as a form of documentation. We use TypeScript and other typed languages, so they are great on giving the information what's actually wanted from some function, for example. And to that end, we also think tests are a form of documentation, so they give a good understanding to you as a developer that what is expected out of this functionality. That's about it. There's of course a lot of things we could always improve, but these are some of the things that we're doing here at Alma.
Yeah, so how are we gonna separate you, because we are doing an audio thing, but maybe your thing is the style guide and your thing is the atomic layout. So maybe that's a good split. So about the atomic layout, I love the fact that it was CSS in JavaScript that's done differently than usual CSS. What about?
While I was listening to your talks, I didn't know to click on. So to me, you were excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, hello, everybody. As you know already, my name is Margarita, and I decided to bridge the gap between the documentation and state management in React by talking about, well, essentially the two.
My name is Josef
I
Hjelström.
would like to talk to you about today. So let's go, guys. Let's dive into it. So for the most of my career, I've been working as a software engineer consultant. Currently, I'm very happy at a company called Nitor. It's a software engineering consultancy, essentially. And yeah, in those few years, I've been onboarded on a lot of projects, like on many different projects. And one thing I've learned about documentation is that when it can really shine, that's during that onboarding process of a person. Thinking about my perspective as a consultant, you're supposed to come on a project and start being very efficient, very fast. So of course, understanding the aspects of it is crucial here. Unfortunately, when you come on a project and understand the documentation isn't really there or isn't really all that great, that becomes a huge issue most of the time. So, you know, it's kind of a bone of contention on many different projects here. I think one of the biggest issues for me has been understanding the context of a project, understanding the domain, the language, the ubiquitous language, as the domain-driven design says, and the data flow. So how so, right? If we think about modern JavaScript, modern front-end frameworks, it's mostly about state management. And there is a lot of things to take into account, right? How your state is supposed to change, animations, data fetching. There is so many libraries. There is such a huge abundance of technologies. So how do we find a source of truth, but sort of unique understanding of how everything is supposed to work? Well, right, wouldn't that be cool if that would be just like one library that would help us manage the state on the front end and we would be over it? We kind of have. If we look at the Google Trends here, Redux is definitely a winner, and it's been the de facto state management tool for most of the React projects here. And I mean, from the perspective of many developers, it's highly overused state management too. It's a huge overhead for many small projects. It might not be the right solution for some of them, but I mean, do we really have a good alternative to it? How so? How it's so popular? The good question to ask each of us is how we even tried, like how we even tested other solutions against our domain model of the application, how we even compared other solutions for state management here. I think as developers, a lot of front-enders have failed to do so in the beginning. I mean, thinking about Redux as a technology, even its creator has written a very good blog post some time ago where he suggests you might not need it. I mean, it's quite self-explanatory here at this point. So yeah, what can be done about it? How much of a solution there can be? I recently discovered this article on Medium, and I like to joke that my only regret in life is not finding this article earlier, because it really has opened my eyes on the perspective and the history of how the state management of the front end was evolving over the years. And it really had me thinking about the question of how many options we actually have when setting up our front-end projects and how many options we actually have to build our application with. I mean, these are just like the most famous options, except for the Redux that we can use on the front-end project to set up our data flow. Yet think about it, like how often we use state charts, how often we use Overmind, like Bacon.js. Come on, people. And there is a lot of even more hipster options out there. So what's the situation here, right? What's the deal? Don't even get me started on micro front ends, because that's when the situation becomes even more complicated tenfold. At this point, front end projects become more and more and more boring, because you come to React projects, you probably have plus minus the same way to write your statement actions. It might not always even be the best one. So what's the deal? I think one of the biggest reasons is the popularity. Like Redux has an abundance of articles online, tutorials, videos, and this is where developers are being lazy. They don't have to write documentation for Redux. They don't have to explain the data flow. They're just using the tool that they think is a Swiss Army knife and just push it into every project. And well, it sort of works for some cases and it sort of doesn't really work for others. Right, and there is so many excuses for not to do it, such as we don't have time, the budget, which is fair, but still everything is in package JSON. Why do you need to write docs? Of course, new developers can always ask me. No offense, but that's my favorite, I think, of all times, because like you end up with a project where the senior dev or tech lead is always busy and you're trying to understand, but you sort of don't. It's in a code base, read comments, write tests is also a popular one. It's your job as a developer to figure out how this works. So all of those things I've actually heard at some point in my career. And it really got me thinking, like, if somebody comes on your project and is really confused and you need to give him or her like 30 comments to the PR, is it really that person's fault? I mean, it might really not be. A partial reason for this little diversity is the fear that we won't be able to support documentation, that we won't be able to explain in a good way why using that specific indie solution actually works better for the app. It's the fear of being judged. It's the fear of letting down and being slower than you can, because, well, the tool that you're using, it's already very familiar to you, right? If we look at the statistics from the state of JS, Redux is actually used because it's already been used before somewhere on a project. That's like the priority number one. I've used it already. I know how it works. Yeah, let's roll with it. Familiar isn't always the best solution. So what could be potentially the solutions for these situations? First solution is remember the domain-driven design, get the book out, really describe your domain model and the business model of the application that you're building in the documentation. Include some learning resources in the docs. Like if you're using something that is outside of the box, include the learning opportunities for the new people to study. Include docs in your PRs. I think this is something that a lot of people just forget, and including docs in the PRs actually helps you review them faster. Let the person figure out the technology by creating a small POC examples. So one thing that I do when I come to a lot of projects that are, well, as we've heard already from the previous discussions, are considered legacy, right? I try to see the tech stack and I'm trying to create a small, teeny tiny project using that tech stack to sort of mimic the historical development of that thing and see how it actually has grown and how it works. And the best thing that you can do for your project, of course, if you can afford the time and the energy, would be to sit down with a tech lead and get a history lesson on the tech stack of a project. Well, I mean, legacy is legacy for a reason, right? Like probably people have tried certain solutions failed, some of them worked, some of them didn't work as well. You might come onto a project where you think like, oh, they're using Bacon.js. Like we should be using Redux instead, right? It's so popular. But once you actually ask for the historical reason from a tech lead, you actually are figuring out why it's been done this way from the beginning and not any other way, and why it works specifically for that specific solution. So in a sense, these are the ways for you to diversify your front end. Be bold, like try new things and think about what will work specifically for your situation, not about something that you could find in some tutorial on the internet. It's okay to try many approaches. It's okay to say, okay, we've tried a poll client. It didn't cater to our needs. We're going to use Overmind on top of it, like I did in some project. It's okay to rewrite your application. You didn't fail as an engineer because of it. Experiment. That's the fun way of development. Create new ways and try to figure out exactly the state management that would fit your project. And I hope that that's something you're going to take away from my presentation. Thank you so much.
I definitely feel like the 9 months or so that I've been here, then I've learned just so much. The way that the hiring and the sort of culture is set up here means that there's just like a really great bunch of bright people. This attitude of hiring to elevate is a really like motivating. It's another great learning experience. I remember like attending the first Friday demos before I was working here, and like there was just some really like great feedback, great questions, like people like really picking into the details, not some high-level abstract thing, but like, you know, why did you call that button that thing? And, like, at first, like, okay, why is this relevant to the whole company? We're all sat here, but you realise that it's just this kind of like, healthy feedback working in practice, and it doesn't even matter what the feedback was. It's just the fact that developers should expect to hear feedback and learn to take it and learn to present their ideas and sell effectively.
Se on sitä, että voi elää enemmän ja paremmin. Kun ihmiset, järjestelmät ja laitteet pelaavat saumattomasti yhteen. Kun löydämme uusia tapoja tehdä asioita ja homma toimii. Se on sitä, että saamme yhdessä aikaan jotain, joka on paljon enemmän kuin osiensa summa. Siinä on vähemmän pöhinää ja enemmän arvoa. Digiarvoa.
T-minus 30 seconds.
are here today at the Rise of Futulon in Tampere 2019. That's where societal impact, learning and personal growth come together.
We have a successful launch of Futulon 2019. Catering is reporting that the beer chill down procedure is proceeding nominally and the coffee machines are loading.
Working autonomously is something that many companies announce, but in fact it's something that is really difficult to achieve from a company perspective. But I like how it's smartly enforced that. Every team has the capacity to decide what technologies to use and how to solve their problems autonomously, and the leadership team believe on that and give us like freedom. We decide company-wise what are going to be like the objectives for the next half a year, and then teams autonomously decide how they can contribute to those goals. Each team is trusted to do the best. Usually when you start in a company, you have to just move fast and break things. But at some point when the company grows, those early days code can start to be problematic when you need to scale some part of the product. So now we have taken that challenge, and with the help also from the leadership, like we have been like bringing this forward, like this can be a problem in the future. So they also gave us like that kind of freedom to decide like, okay, if you think that this is like fixing things is more important at this moment than just building like new features on top of broken things, like go ahead and fix it. So right now we are building a new product that is gonna take care of fixing the whole things that we felt that has been broken for a while. So that brings us together to the topic of how autonomous the team can be and what kind of decisions you can take. And in Smartly, I'm happy that you can take those decisions and prioritize over what maybe a leadership team could be considering at the moment.
Yeah, so how are we gonna separate you, because we are doing an audio thing, but maybe your thing is the style guide and your thing is the academic layout. So maybe that's a good split. So about the academic layout, I love the fact that it was CSS in JavaScript that's done differently than usual CSS in JavaScript. What about?
Like while I was listening to your talks, I've been noticing so to me you were excellent.
The sweet heat is suffocating. I'm waiting and always hesitating. Kryptonite desires set my heart afire. Heart on fire. Set my heart afire. Jack it up.
feel the waves cut through me, hypnotized by the sounds I'm breathing in. Hold tight.